there's studies to show that if you don't get enough deep sleep, and how much higher your inflammatory
Right.
environment in your body can be. So
Right.
this is really important. And we talk about all these ways to decrease inflammation, but there's one that's right
Right.
here that
Right.
comes naturally, you know,
Exactly.
not easily for everyone,
Yeah.
but it's a natural part of our
Right.
day, 24 hours. And so optimizing it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because I think this is the thing. We always forget, like everybody's so like worried about taking all these supplements and doing
Right,
X, Y,
right.
Z, right? I mean, and it's like sleep is right there and it's such a big part of detoxification and boosting immunity and learning and all of these things. And we don't think about it enough. And I think, that's also a function of the world that we live in where we can have lights on 24 hours a day. And so there's like this idea that you can just be doing stuff all the time. You can be, quote, productive,
Right.
falling into that productivity nonsense that we have, especially in the United States. People will give up their sleep. I think yeah. So it's a great reminder, I think. And it was helpful for me to even like review the mechanics of sleep,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and think about that again. Like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's going on.
And something you just said super important about that productivity, because actually in that deep sleep is where the ATP molecules, the energy molecules, are how we make energy. That's where we kind of clean up the byproducts of that and refuel to make more ATP the next day. And
Hmm.
that's not important for people to like memorize or remember.
Right.
What I think is important is to know that it is almost impossible to have enough energy to do all the things we want to do. I
Right.
mean, we know that, but we
Right.
don't. We somehow think
Exactly.
we can skimp on it, right? Like
Right.
I can get through it, but
Right.
it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and then yeah, and also, building on what you're saying, there's also this, another system that's sort of in the brain and the nervous system, which is the glymphatic system, which is kind of like that lymphatic system for your central nervous system, right? Where we're removing those waste products during sleep from the brain that are accumulating while we're awake. And it's really, really important. And this is, again, the glymphatic system is really active during sleep. So again, we need this time to clean up our brain so we can function
yeah.
better. And it goes to that productivity thing. It's like, I always, and I say this a lot on I found this, on the podcast episode, I've been saying this a lot, is that we use so many words interchangeably. So like productivity, a lot of people will think that means efficiency, and it's not the same thing.
Mm,
Because you could be, quote, productive and like just crossing things off of a list, but are you really efficiently doing it? And that's where
yeah.
I think like understanding how sleep is so important for your efficiency to be able to do things in an efficient manner so that you're not like just taking an hour to do something that might take 15 minutes. I think that makes
Yeah.
a big difference, right?
It's huge. And you're making me think too. I mean, language is so important, right? That I think we
Right.
know so much wisdom about sleep. I mean, going back to that REM part where we have our memories and our learning, we also process our emotions around it, right? I was saying that. I
Hmm.
think that we know that in our wisdom. So we'll say, if you're really sad or angry about something, people will say, get a good night's sleep and let's talk
Right.
about it in the morning. And
Yes.
that's actually not a bypass. It really matters. So
Right.
if you're
Right.
actually processing emotions and
Right.
waking up with an understanding of where you
Right.
are around it. And
Hmm.
so I think what we're saying as a whole is that people look at sleep as a non-doing state. And
Right.
I think,
Ah,
yes, it
yeah.
is a restful state, but
Yes.
it's not a nothing state. It is a
Right.
state of so much metabolism, of biochemical factors, of neurotransmitters, and of emotions and processing, our thoughts and
Hmm.
our learning. And so there is so much happening there that, that's why you get so much activity in a sleep study. You can watch people's brains. And I think it's just this underestimation of the power.
Right. No, and mic drop, because what you just said is so good that we look at sleep as a resting time, as a non-doing time, but actually there's
Mm.
so much happening. I think that's
Yeah.
so good the way you just described it, because It's so true. And if we look at it as more than rest, which of course rest is so important, but there's so much that's so important for our functioning, for our health
Yeah.
that's going on during that restful time. It's a doing time actually in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah,
Of
and
our
you said it
bodies.
actually in the beginning, you said it's a repair state as well, right? So that's
Mhm.
like it's rest and repair.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
super important. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about is before we get into some of the, tactical things that we can talk about, like how to improve your sleep, is let's talk about one more thing as far as the mechanics go, which is the influence of light and hormones
Mm.
on sleep. Sort of the master hormones of melatonin and cortisol and how that affects our sleep. Do you want to dive into that, Tamith?
Yeah. I mean, we all know, right, that we have a rhythm that we wake up with the sun and we, at some point, and we go to bed in the dark, unless you're a night shift worker or in jet lag.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for all that, right? When we get up in the morning, our cortisol levels are at their highest because that's what gets us up. It
Right,
tells our body that it's time to get out of bed and to give us some energy to do that.
right.
In the morning, our melatonin levels are at their lowest because that also gives our body the signal like this is over, now you can get up. But
Mhm.
those are inversely proportional. So our cortisol is at the highest, our melatonin's at the lowest. And then those go into a pattern where you can't see me, my fingers are moving, but they go into a pattern where the cortisol goes down through the day to the evening to get us to sleep. And the melatonin goes up through the day to the evening
Mhm.
to make us also stimulated to sleep. But there's key things that
Right.
make this cycle work. And
Mhm.
so one is light. And light is
Mm.
super important. When you get up and have that morning light in your eyes, there's actually melanopsin receptors in our eyes that are stimulated. And
Mhm.
those actually set off that stimulation of melatonin to slowly go up through the day. And
Mhm.
so I think, sometimes we are and actually, let me add something that also, when the dusk is coming and the light is waning, that also gives our bodies stimulation, that dusky light for the cortisol to go down and the melatonin to finish coming up. And I
Mhm.
think we are really focused on nighttime routines for
Mhm.
sleep. And we
Yeah.
should be. I think that's
Yeah.
super important, bringing the light down in the evening and winding down in your mind and your body. But we
Mhm.
don't talk enough about the morning.
Right.
And so just getting that morning light. And I think it's really hard. People go from waking to doing work on a screen
Right.
inside. And
Right.
it can take just 10 or 15 minutes if you can make it part of your morning to just be outside, even on a cloudy day.
Mhm.
And so, just understanding that, I think this just plays so much into what you're always talking about, which is,
Right.
in Ayurveda, we're really wanting people to understand how to be in line with nature.
Right.
And we weren't meant to just be inside all day or in the morning, especially, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that you're bringing up a great point, which is that actually good sleep hygiene starts in the morning, which is so like backwards to think about sometimes because you're like, oh, I need to get ready in the evening. But it actually starts in the morning with what you're doing. And we'll talk about some of those habits and things that you can institute to help you get better sleep and help to, reduce your sleep disturbance, etc. But it really does start in the morning, good sleep
Yeah.
hygiene, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's super important. And again, also, back to your point about this morning sun viewing, right? Of really making sure that you get 10 to 15 minutes of, natural sunlight into your eyes, not through a window, not through sunglasses. Try and go outside. You get a little walk in, you get sort of, double benefits of some prana moving through you, some energy, getting a little bit of exercise and movement, and also getting that sunlight into your eyes. It's just good for your health all around. So I think those
Yeah,
are
and I
important.
and I have to say, like, for anyone listening, I find this really challenging. I just want you to know.
Yeah.
I'm saying
Yeah.
this, but I find it challenging.
Yeah.
I will get up and I have like a way that I do my morning almost every morning. Sometimes I slip from it, but where I'm trying to be off a screen and be in what I call analog time and all that. But getting outside is actually another step that
Yeah.
actually I find hard, because it just maybe I'm not ready to take a walk, or
Mhm.
then I've got a work day that's really busy and I just start funneling into it after I do my morning and get showered and ready.
Yeah.
And so I just want to extend some compassion to people. Like, this is
Yes.
not easy.
Yeah.
I would say that my husband has it down, this part, and
Mhm.
I don't I watch him and I just think, "Oh, that's how you do it." Is that he just has a habit and he
Mhm.
just does it where he takes his coffee
Yeah.
outside on one of our decks and
Yep.
he sits there and drinks it and meditates.
Yeah.
And he'll make sure his eyes are open for, part of that time.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure why, but it's a harder leap for me to do that. And so
Mhm.
I'm just saying, like, some people have it kind of wired into the routine and
Mhm.
others like me are still trying to figure out, because I get a morning walk most of the time, but it's
Right.
not always in that most important
Yeah.
hour after I wake up. And so I am still, working through this is what I would
Yeah.
say.
No, I agree. I agree. It's hard because I mean, I think again, you can extend some compassion to yourself and, do baby steps. Like make sure that you do get outside in the morning time sometime before lunch, before noon. Put a time on it. And then maybe from there, then you go to, okay, I'm gonna try now to move it earlier in the day, earlier in the morning, maybe within 90 minutes of getting up. And then
Yeah.
maybe it's within an hour of getting up or whatever. So you kind of
Yeah.
slowly creep towards the habit that you want. And then we've talked about this in habits, the whole idea of habit stacking and linking. I think that's what Steve is doing, your husband.
Yes.
He's linking his morning coffee and some meditation to that morning sunlight viewing. So he's like kind of grouped them together. So it happens. It's much more likely that it happens, which I think is great.
Yeah, I blame him that he's taken the spot, but that's really not a good reason. I really need to figure it out. But, this and I think that I can feel the difference, Avanti, when I don't do it because
Yeah.
I can feel the impact of the artificial light all day
Mhm.
and I don't have fluorescent bulbs, which a lot of offices have, but I can feel that I feel like stuffy, like I haven't gotten that fresh light. Just like
Mhm.
fresh air, I think about
Yeah.
fresh light.
Yeah.
And
That's
so I can feel the difference.
Yeah. No, I like that fresh light. That's a good way to putting it. Some fresh light
Yeah, I just
in the
thought of that. I
morning.
never
That's
thought of it
cool.
that way, but
I've
I feel like that's really important.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it.
Yeah. I've never heard it said that way. I like that. I really like that. I'm gonna keep that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, me
Okay,
too.
so we've talked about some of the mechanics. So now let's move into something that you actually brought up when we were preparing for this episode, which was, we all focus on this physical aspect. And you kind of alluded to this already. We think about the physical aspect of sleep, of getting that rest, getting into bed, the whole, like all the things that we do around getting into bed. But you had a really great point, which was, what about putting our minds and our hearts to sleep? And I
Yeah.
really was struck by that. Tell me what you were kind of getting at that. I think that's really intriguing and important. So what are you
Yeah, I mean, I
saying there?
think, in all transparency, the reason I think of it like this is because I'm one of those people who, until menopause, did not have problems with sleep. We can talk about that in a different episode. It's a
Yeah.
whole nother midlife sleep is a whole
Yeah.
nother issue. But
Mhm.
until this time in my life, literally, like sleep is my friend. I just get in bed. It drives my husband crazy because he has a hard time, but I get in bed and
Mhm.
I'm asleep.
Mhm.
But my body sleeps easily, but
Mhm.
my mind and heart have never slept easily. And so my
Mhm.
body is ready to sleep, but sometimes my mind and heart just take over.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people who, maybe people listening can resonate. I can just play back the day. I can really get caught up in the hard parts of the day and the negative parts of the day. And so I really had to start thinking of it like this, where I would go to bed and think, okay, my body feels tired,
Mhm.
but what about my mind and heart? How can I let those wind down to go to sleep?
Mhm.
And for me, it had to become a ritual and a practice. And I have different ways I do that, which I'm happy to talk about. But it feels really important because, and I feel like most of my patients tell me their mind's racing at night or they're
Mhm.
stressed out. And for anyone who has been up in the middle of the night, especially my favorite example is nursing young children,
Right.
newborns. If you're up in the middle of the night, the most catastrophic things happen in your mind. Like it just is scary, like uh, is this baby okay? Am I okay? I mean, things just start
Mhm.
going through your mind. So,
Yeah.
um, it's really important to understand how to put your mind and heart to sleep. And
Mhm.
also, if they wake up too early, how to put them back to sleep. So I
Right.
think of it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, no, and I think that, you're getting to a really good point, which is also that I think many of us think that our sleep will be fine because our bodies are physically tired, but it's really the mind and the emotions that I think that's what I hear the most from other people that I'm talking to, whether it's students or patients, or even for myself. It's the mind and the heart going to sleep that is actually keeping me awake or keeping people awake or disturbing their sleep, right? And, even like your example of, nursing young children, but this is happening in midlife too. I'm in menopause too. And like I wake up in the middle of the night and then all of a sudden all the thoughts come racing in because I'm first like, why am I awake? Why can't I sleep? And then all my mind just keeps going. And there you are. It's like 2 hours later and I'm still awake. So
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
mind heart piece is really important